Well, hello again. It's April the 28th. The end is near. In CoPhi today, the curtain begins to come down on this crazy, unprecedented spring 2020 pandemic university semester. We conclude Warburton and his little history of philosophy. Nigel has his critics, but I think his vision, his accessibility, and his commitment to bringing philosophy to an actual public deserve praise. With John Rawls on justice, Alan Turing and John Searle on the future of artificial intelligence, AI, and Peter Singer's modern Socratic quest to reorder our lives by posing inconvenient questions and uncomfortable challenges to our way of life. We also wrap up Fantasyland, Kurt Andersen's story of untruth in America for 500 years. Let's hope he's right when he says at the end that we are indeed at peak Fantasyland now, or we can hope that we are. That would be the good news. And we also conclude American Philosophy, a Love Story by John Cagg. Life may be worth living. That's his last word. It may be worth living. Our task is to make maybe definitely. In A and P, we close Michael Ruse's A Meaning to Life. His Victorian-inspired wit and occasional glibness is not to everyone's taste. Richard Dawkins, for instance, Ruse delights in telling us he's not a fan. But I really like the way Ruse wraps up his story with this sage advice regarding the search for ultimate meaning in capital letters. He says, don't spend your life agonizing about this or letting people manipulate you with false promises. Think for yourself. As my Quaker mentors insisted, he was raised Quaker. Life here and now can be fun and rewarding, deeply meaningful. Note is lowercase m, meaningful. Remember, David Hume didn't just play backgammon when his metaphysical researches left him despondent and confused. He dined, he conversed, he was merry with his friends. Like I said, a nice cup of tea, like Ruse said. Nice cup of tea, or perhaps a little single malt, and a chat. He says, a chat with his beloved grad students, and Scruffy. Scruffy is his dog, just see the jacket illustration on the back of his book. Joining in the conversation. Live for the real present, not the hoped-for future. Leave it at that. I think Professor Ruse must also, like me, be a fan of the end of the film Monty Python's Meaning of Life, where we are told, meaning of life? Well, it's nothing very special. Just try and be nice to people, avoid eating fat, read a good book every now and then, get some walking in, and try and live together in peace and harmony with people of all creeds and nations. Good advice. And just remember that you're standing on a planet that's evolving. That's the opening riff in the Galaxy song, which is also, I think, in the meaning of life, right? Ruse's A Meaning to Life concludes poetically in the woods with George Meredith's salute to the lover of life who sees the flame in our dust and a gift in our breath. Well, my mentor, John Locke at Vanderbilt, is one of those lovers of life. In his In Love with Life, Reflections on the Joy of Living and Why We Hate to Die, Locke celebrates life, and in the spirit of Martin Haglin's This Life and the resonant keynote of our odd semester, the glorious finitude of our life. Locke says, we can be grateful to be alive, and we can enjoy the surge of energy and the struggle for moments of meaning and light. In this way, though we may not always make love to life or prevail over force and circumstance, we can at least glory in the effort and feel fully alive. The effort of living and the vital feeling of life. Cue Mr. Rogers. It's a great feeling to know you're alive. You know that. Are what motivate the cartoon figure to confront the sign-carrying apocalypse monger who insists the end is near with an impatient demand. Yes, but what are your goals? And I say that's a question you always have to answer if you're seeking meaning in life. Well, and Peter Singer too. Peter Singer, facing the threat of apocalypse, would ask that same question. What are your goals? He is the last philosopher in our little history, a self-described professor of bioethics with a background in philosophy, and a utilitarian who never stops wondering what he and we can do to optimize happiness and minimize misery. He insists that we think hard about animal suffering, saving all the lives we can, doing the most good we can, and generally about living ethically in the real world. He's hard to answer, like Socrates. Also, like Socrates, he's unpopular with those who take his challenges personally. Unlike Socrates, to his great good fortune, he'll not be fatally persecuted for his questions and their implicit rebukes. Turing and Searle, Alan Turing, John Searle, represent the debate between those who hope and expect that artificial intelligence will continue to evolve and to enhance and perhaps even complete our lives, and those who are sure, or at least counter-hopeful, that it won't and can't. Should we be so certain that our consciousness was emergent from biological conditions not conceivably replicable in silicon? Don't ask me, ask her. Ask Alan Watts, 2.0. But maybe don't ask Dr. Castor of Transcendence if that's the virtual afterlife. I don't want to go. John Rawls is the social contractarian who proposes that we think about principles of justice from behind a veil of ignorance, so as to eliminate special pleading and personal prejudice. If you don't know who you are, you won't know what's in it for you to support this or that policy or program or party or theory of justice. But will you know enough to care about anything at all is the challenge to Rawls. I have a video here, Thought Experiment, Veil of Ignorance, check it out, at jposopher.blogspot.com, up at dawn 2.0. I'm not sure why the Swiss, in particular, are chosen in this video for unveiled criticism. Inequity is at least as great in the U.S., but, well, watch it and see what you think. As for caring, on either side of the veil, Rawls himself cared a great deal about baseball. You knew I had to mention that one more time. This is a subject I wanted to pursue for this year's Baseball in Literature and Culture Conference in Kansas that got postponed, I'm not going to say canceled, by the coronavirus. I hope that they're going to pick it up in September. And so maybe we'll get around to talking Rawls and baseball there sometime. September, is it too soon to hope for September? Would a veil help? And what would Rawls say about the present state of financial compensation and free agency in his favorite game? Is the income gap between, say, Red Sox players and Fenway spectators, not to mention people who work selling overpriced beer and hot dogs at Fenway, is that income gap something that Rawls's difference principle can accommodate, can speak to, and overcome? It says that any inequities are to be justified in terms of the idea that the least well-off is still better off than they would otherwise be. Well, I don't know, but that's the way I would go about trying to support Rawls and inequity to the extent that he allows it. But what did Rawls say? Well, he said baseball is the best of all games. I've got no complaint about that. Behind the veil or not, I would agree with that. First, he says the rules of the game are in equilibrium, which is an important concept for him. That is, from the start, the diamond was made just the right size, the pitcher's mound just the right distance from home plate, and this makes possible marvelous plays, such as the double play. The physical layout of the game is perfectly adjusted to the human skills it is meant to display and to call into grateful exercise. Whereas basketball, for example, is constantly, or was then, adjusting its rules to get them in balance. Second, the game does not give unusual preference or advantage to special physical types. For example, tall men in basketball. All sorts of abilities can find a place somewhere, the tall and the short. I would have mentioned Jose Altuve before he got caught up in that Astros cheating scandal to illustrate Rawls's point. They can all enjoy the game together in different possibilities and positions. Third, the game uses all parts of the body, the arms to throw, the legs to run, and to swing the bat, etc. Per contra, say, soccer, where you can't touch the ball. Per contra, football, where it's hard to know what's happening in the battlefront along the line. All plays of the game are open to view. And, well, anyway, you can read more of Rawls's view on baseball. I do want to get this one in. There's the factor of time. Boy, hasn't time been strange the last 6 weeks or so. The factor of time, the use of which is a central part of any game. Baseball shares with tennis the idea that time never runs out, as it does in basketball and football and soccer. This means there's always time for the losing side to make a comeback. The last of the ninth inning becomes one of the most potentially exciting parts of the game. And while the same sometimes happens in tennis also, it seems to happen less often. Cricket, much like baseball, and indeed I must correct my remark above that baseball is the only game where scoring is not done with the ball, does not have a time limit. Okay, enough about that. Kurt Anderson in Fantasyland says the right has now effectively raised 2 generations of fair and balanced, quote unquote, Fox watchers who discount all facts that contradict their opinions. Right? They come up with alternative facts. Well, that was a joke back in grad school when we used to say, discard all facts that dispute your theory. It was a parody principle with which we mocked our own earnest seriousness. Now it's evidently the new norm. As you know who would tweet, how sad, all caps. It's evident that the incumbent POTUS understands very little of the machinery and purpose of shared governance. And yet he seems to have understood better than almost everybody that the breakdown of a shared public reality built upon widely accepted facts is a golden opportunity for his variety of hustler politics, under cover of the don't even think about it mantra. University of Connecticut's Michael Lynch gets a mention in Fantasyland, a positive mention. Michael Lynch is one of the most astute observers of these truth-discounted times, and of the crucially enabling role played by the internet in diluting our commitment to a shared public reality. In the Internet of Us, he writes, my hypothesis is that information technology, while expanding our ability to know in one way, is actually impeding our ability to know in other, more complex ways that require us to take responsibility for our own beliefs and work creatively to grasp and reason how information fits together. Greater knowledge doesn't always bring with it greater understanding. We're glutted with information, much of it false or irrelevant, while starving for wisdom and integrity. The gods of Silicon Valley will have much to answer for if they don't step back from their unexamined support of authoritarianism in the public sphere, gathering and disseminating user data for the benefit of self-interested politicians, providing a ready and eagerly neutral platform for all kinds of misinformation and outright lies, etc. But there's good news. It can't get much worse. We're surely at peak fantasy now, aren't we? Well, there might be good news. The final installment of American Philosophy Love Story reveals William Ernest Hawking's possibly illicit love interest, the Nobel novelist Pearl S. Buck, who wrote The Good Earth. She declared herself weary unto death of proselytizing hypocritical American fundamentalist missionaries in China, or wherever. She was in China. Much like Barbara Kingsolver's later tale of missionaries in the Congo, in the Poisonwood Bible, she thought the do-gooders did far more harm than good when condescending to their lost sheep. We'd all do better to listen and learn what we can learn from one another rather than trying so hard to win converts to our point of view. Gabriel Marcel was the French existentialist and fan of Hawking, and I think friend of Hawking, who, contrary to the more prominent rock stars Sartre, de Beauvoir, and Camus, did believe in God. He said, life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. I say, can't it be both? But he and his atheist counterparts did agree that philosophy must begin in actual human experience and the concrete stuff of life, not in any theoretical abstractions. The dead are gone in body, and many of us also doubt their presence in any form of supernatural spirit. But their memories, legacies, and for those who committed their thought to print, their words may persist. It is some sort of ancestry cult, isn't it, that engages those thoughts and continues the conversation with the old dead philosophers? No, it's not an ancestry cult. We mustn't worship the old dead philosophers, but why wouldn't we want to conduct a virtual dialogue with the wisest of the dead? Human finitude may be tragic, but it needn't be a total loss. The dead and the living may continue to commune together. What else is a library but a gathering place for secular, though in its bibliophilic and philosophic way, sacred communion? Cagg's response to Royce's last written words is quite poignant on this point. John Cagg ends his book where he began it, returning to the question of whether life is truly worth living. How do you live a creative life, a meaningful life in the face of our inevitable demise? His answer may strike some as disappointingly equivocal. It's been suggested that maybe is not so good an answer to the question as possibly, with the latter's emphasis more hopeful and encouraging. That's as may be. But the publication of Cagg's latest book, actually not his latest at this point, Hiking with Nietzsche was the sequel, and Sick Souls and Healthy Minds, all about William James, is his latest, just came out in March. But in any case, in Hiking with Nietzsche on Becoming Who You Are, Cagg gives strong indication that his maybe is as positive an affirmation as can be. As Nietzsche expressed it, the formula of my happiness is a yes, a no, a straight line, and a goal. Remember that cartoon character that I led off with above. Right? A goal. We need to have a goal. We're going to pursue meaning and get on with our meaningful lives. He who has a why to live can endure almost anyhow. That's a statement made more familiar by Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning, but it comes from Nietzsche. Right? The peripatetic life is the how of choice for Cagg as it was for Nietzsche, who said all great thoughts are conceived while walking. Walking is among the most life-affirming of human activities. It is the way we organize space and orient ourselves to the world at large. It is the living proof that repetition, placing one foot in front of the other, can in fact allow a person to make meaningful progress. Emerson, who was one of Nietzsche's heroes, agreed. Each soul, walking in its own path, walks firmly. So, walk your path. And finally, as Cagg puts it in the last paragraph of his acknowledgments, the project at West Wind, the recovery of love and purpose, and especially the birth of his daughter, have all converged to restore for him the zest that makes life so very worth living. Zest awaits us all, even in Fantasyland. So, any last words this semester? Well, I turn to William James, surprise, who said, very nearly on his deathbed, and I think his last month of life, there is no conclusion. What has concluded that we might conclude in regard to it? There are no fortunes to be told, and there's no advice to be given. Farewell. Great exit line, Professor James, but I can't entirely agree. Don't conclude prematurely is itself darn good advice. The Pythons had good advice too, as I've already noted. All right? Try and be nice to people. Avoid eating fat. Read a good book every now and then. Get some walking in. Try to live together in peace and harmony with people of all creeds and nations. And Uncle Albert Einstein offers the best advice of all. Simply don't stop questioning. Don't think about why you question. Simply don't stop questioning. Don't worry about what you can't answer, and don't try to explain what you can't know. Curiosity is its own reason. Aren't you in awe when you contemplate the mysteries of eternity, of life, of the marvelous structure behind reality? And this is the miracle of the human mind. To use its constructions, concepts, and formulas as tools to explain what man sees, feels, and touches. Try to comprehend a little more each day. Have holy curiosity. And keep your eyes on the goal. All right, everybody. It's been a good semester. I look forward to reading all of your final reports, your dialogues, and even when that's over, feel free to keep in touch. Most of all, take care of your health, your splendid health, as William James said to an ailing friend. It's worth all the truths in the firmament. Talk to you later.